I just want to say that I know a number of Christians, more conservative Christians, have not been charitable to your metaphorical interpretation. And I also know that you consistently declare that the priority for Christians should be how we act in light of the resurrection, as opposed to the debate over whether or not the resurrection is literal. Learning from you and strangely from Dr. Dale Allison, whose scholarship is very different from yours,
Yeah.
has led me to accept this priority. And I think Matthew, towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7:21 to 27, also implies that
Yeah.
how you act on Jesus is most important, more important
Yeah.
than whether you come to him and say, Lord, Lord. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that for sure. I don't want to attack your position, but I still want to question about it since it intrigues me so, and
Yeah.
offer some respectful objections.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I don't mind people being uncharitable. I would like them to be accurate. And I
Mm.
would like them to have read me if they talk about me. Now, nobody has to read me at all. It's out there. But if somebody wants to talk about my position, I do expect they have read me at least. And not just read me in the 1991 when the historical Jesus came out. God, that's how many years ago now. I don't know. Anyway, it's a long time ago. So let me think about that for a while. Here's what's important for me. I live in a post Enlightenment world. When I'm reading pre Enlightenment people, I try to understand their world. So in the first century, for example, I've read pretty much all the contemporary texts of the first century, most of them. Not always in the original language, but a lot of them. I visited most of the sites. I've been almost everywhere. Like that song, I've been everywhere. I visited most of the museums all over the place. Now, I'm not going to claim I can really understand the first century. No, no, no. But I have a sense of it. And the sense is that the first century is a pre Enlightenment world, and everyone in there, more or less, accepts miracles, marvels. Not just the Jews and not just the Christians. They do. If you read the texts, Caesar had Augustus had ascended into heaven before Jesus got a chance. So, yeah. So I am then forced
Sorry,
as a.
if I might butt in.
Go on, sure.
Um,
Butt in, please.
yeah, virtually everyone agreed in miracles. Virtually all of the greatest
Okay.
ancient historians, in their histories or annals
Yeah.
of history, they report miracles and supernatural occurrences and omens and
Okay.
all this.
Yeah.
But resurrection isn't isn't a widespread belief like miracles is a widespread belief. So
Okay.
virtually all pagans agree, or some agree in an afterlife, a sort of Hades kind of thing, a Sheol kind of thing, where you're maybe wispy or you're just non-existent. You die, you're gone at death. And then
Yes.
not even all Jews believed in resurrection. Pharisees did, but
Okay.
Sadducees didn't. And so, if maybe that's some pushback that everyone was willing to believe in some miracle, but not everyone, maybe even most people, were not willing to believe in some kind of resurrection.
Okay. Good. Let me take you up from there. Now, if I don't really come back, just as you say, butt in again. It's a conversation. Yes, that's true. I think anyone could debate our ascension, but resurrection, you're right. I think you get a fair example. That's a story of the Acts with Paul at Athens. Everything's going fine. He mentions the word resurrection. They just laugh at him. I mean, if they even understand it, I not if ascension is universal, resurrection is not even Jewish. It's one sectarian group, as you just said, the Pharisees. The Sadducees dismissed it. They thought it was rubbish. They would have said, "Where's that in the Bible?" Yeah, maybe you could catch your fingernails in Daniel, but not much. I mean, they were right. The Sadducees, they could have said to the Pharisees, "You guys claim to be great traditionalists, but where's that in the tradition?" And of course, the Pharisees had to pull oral tradition to get out of it because no, it's not there. It's a brand new explanation, maybe 150 years old. I do not know, and nobody knows what percentage, if you took a poll in the first century Jews, would have said, "We believe in the resurrection." Not Jesus now, but the general resurrection. I don't know. The Pharisees did, and the Pharisees were popular with the ordinary people, but to be fair, they didn't get a very good shake from the Christics. So let's remember that. Now, I think you're right. If anyone in the first century said resurrection and wasn't using it as simply a synonym for ascension, but meant it in the Pharisaic sense, most people, the vast majority of the world, would simply laugh at them. Because what you're claiming is that God has already begun a cleanup of the world, and that's going to happen in the future. He's already begun it by, let us say, symbolically raising the whole human race. Now, think of that for a second. Try and think of it literally. Look at that image that you showed me earlier. Paul, excuse me, Jesus is taking Adam and Eve out of Hades. Now, if you simply look at that, and you're not going to get any image of that before around the year 700, by the way, but imagine it. How would you take that literally? How could you take that literally? God has liberated the human race from death. Okay, I actually believe that utterly. I think the vision of Jesus liberates the human race from death. And the fact that we haven't taken it seriously is why that's where the human race is slowly but steadily heading to the extinction of itself. I don't quite know how long it will take. I don't know if we'll learn fast enough to stop it, but it's absolutely meaning for me, and we're in the middle of it. And it doesn't make a difference whether you believe it or not, any more than whether you believe in global warming or not. It doesn't make any difference whether you believe in it or not. Don't believe in gravity if you want, but don't jump off a 30-story building just in case. So I want to insist that there's a vision there that cannot be taken literally, but must be taken with absolute deadly seriousness as a metaphor. That's what's at stake. That's why it's not enough for me to say, well, do you accept it or not? How are you inside it is the question I'm asking. How are you literally inside it? And I know the answer in the New Testament is you can only do it if you have the spirit of it. You can't do it simply by trying to imitate. You can't do it by saying, well, I like that, but I think I'll try and live like that. That's not strong enough. You have to take the spirit of resurrection inside you. If I could use an example, supposing supposing I had met Martin Luther King, I never did. And supposing I said to him, I really admire you, Martin. I would love to have your spirit. Could I have your spirit? Let's get rid of my own, cowardly spirit, and I'll take your spirit. And Martin said to me, yeah, but if you get that, you could end up in jail. Oh, could I end up dead? Oh, yeah. Oh, and I'm backing off hard. Could I have just maybe 5% of your spirit, just enough to be kind of decent, but not, you know, enough to be comfortable, not enough to be courageous. I think this is the way I actually see it. So it's much more powerful than me was we have to accept it. We have to say, Lord, Lord. We have to absorb the free gift. It is a free gift. It's like a free download to your computer. But you have to say yes, of course, even to a free download. There's no such thing as a free gift, but only a free offer. So you accept it because that's the only way that'll be powerful enough. And that's the way I see the vision itself coming. But, but to be honest with you now, in case that I think it's a metaphor. No, I don't think in any way, shape, or form Adam and Eve came out of anywhere hand in hand with Jesus. Nor do I think literally Jesus, if you had been there and watching the tomb that morning, would you have seen Jesus going up alone? Neither would you have seen him coming out with Adam and Eve. I'm sorry. So every time I see a Christian asking, not a dumb question, if you had a camera there in front of the tomb, could you have seen at least a light flash or something? Would you have seen Jesus coming out? I can imagine that, sure. Sure, I can. I can't imagine putting a camera in front of the Eastern Vision. I don't know how to do it. Where do you do it? Down in Hades? So I'm looking at these two as two powerful metaphors. And when somebody says to me, and they do, Nahoa, oh, you mean it's just a metaphor? I have to quit. Because metaphor creates reality for me. And I don't know what else does it. It's the way you imagine the future and decide to live it, of course. I can imagine all sorts of futures and no intention of doing anything about them. And that's just daydreaming. But if I imagine the future and then live accordingly, for better or for worse, I will create that future. And if enough of us do it, we will create that future. And it may save us or it may destroy us. So that's why metaphor for me is, is far more powerful than discussions about literal or metaphorical by people who I know don't mean metaphor the same way I do.
I mean, I can definitely respect that, even if I haven't been convinced that it's metaphorical.
No,
Maybe a question could be, what reason in your eyes is there for thinking that the early Christians who affirmed resurrection interpreted their own language of anastasis metaphorically? And is there any
yeah.
Jewish precedents for are there any Jewish precedents for kind of a metaphorical resurrection? Because in my limited understanding, Jews who affirmed resurrection thought of it as a literal bodily phenomenon at the end of time. In the last days, you have an article on the Jewish context of resurrection, and you cite Second Maccabees, wherein martyrs stretch out their hands and cry out, "These I got from heaven, and from Him I hope to get them back." And you say that here we find a full and clear assertion of bodily resurrection, emphasized almost to the point of absurdity, but therefore all the more unavoidable. So I'm curious if there's any, beside like in contrast to this, if there's any Jewish precedents for metaphorical resurrection.
No, and I presume you're right that they are taking that literally, but let me be very clear. I don't know that, and neither do you. Because I don't know it. I mean that. I'm not using that as a refuge. When I'm reading first century stuff, there's times I can kind of glimpse that, well, maybe ordinary people would have taken this literally, but philosophers or maybe even the educated wouldn't. For example, when I'm reading the opening chapters of Livy, now he's living under Augustus. Okay, he's writing history, the history of the Roman Empire. Oh, you better be very, very careful, Livy. So when he goes back to talk about Mars, he says, well, this is more poetry, but what could be worthy of the history of Rome than poetry? And then he comes down to what everyone knows, that Augustus claims that Aeneas, and helped by Anchises, who is the father of Aeneas, whose mother is Venus, takes them and their son all the way from doomed Troy to found the Roman race. And, says the Augustan poet, the name of the son is Julius, I think, Julius, the founder of the Julian line. Now here's me, poor old Livy, I'm writing a history. I know that it's supposed to have been named Ascanius. I would just like not to get killed, please. And say, well, I don't think that's true. I think most people who saw the statues, the images that were all over the place of little Julius being led by the left hand of Aeneas, took it literally. I think they probably did. I don't know for sure. I really don't. But I see Livius trying not to get in trouble by saying, well, who can tell about something which is so old? Oh, that's lovely. And he's only talking about what? I don't know, maybe 700, 800 years. So I'm not using that kind of a refuge, who can talk. But I really want to say, when people read ancient texts, all of them, not just the biblical ones. I don't know when people read the speeches, for example, um, Agricola's great speech about Romans making a desert and calling it peace. Did they really think that Calgacus had made that speech? But I don't know. So I'm not going to insist that any of us must. And neither will I claim, if you take this literally, you're not a Christian or something like that, or you're absurd or you're stupid or anything like that. Because when we're dealing with ancient texts, from pre-Enlightenment texts, now there's one other thing, Nahoa. I'm living in America at the moment. I find there are millions of people claiming things that I don't think happened. I don't know if they believe in them or just using them for, metaphorical purposes. I won't get into politics, but you know what I'm talking about. I don't know if I'm dealing with a pre-Enlightenment mind that believes whatever it hears, whatever it reads, whatever it sees. So I don't know it. And neither does anyone else. So my solution is this. I spent a whole evening one time debating with Tom Wright, and I said, let me imagine that everything you claim about the resurrection is correct, and that the finding of the empty tomb and the vision of Jesus were all literal, just like you claim. Now, I want to debate, what's the difference if I claim it's metaphorical in terms of life? And we bored everyone because the rest of the evening we spent agreeing. Now, we could have spent the evening me arguing that I don't think the tomb was found empty. I think that's a mark in creation. And Tom would have argued, with very good arguments, of course, to a draw, that no, it happened. We could have spent the whole evening doing that. I am convinced that part of this process is scholars not wanting to get into trouble by saying what it really means. So let's debate one side, the other side, because we know it's going to be a draw. If a text says this happened and you claim, well, it's a unique miracle like resurrection, and I claim something else, we know it's going to be a draw. If there's any neutral person up there, they'll probably say, well, the most it's a draw. It's maybe unique, and how can you argue against a unique thing? You can't. If it only happened once in the world, the way we know about stuff is, generally speaking, if I claim there was no dawn, you're going to use the argument that it happened every morning, and I'm claiming one morning there was no dawn. It was night for 24 hours. You're probably not going to believe it, but your argument is going to be statistical. I can't use the statistics. It happened only once. So I would think the wisdom would be, if you take it literally, then live accordingly. If you take it metaphorically, then live accordingly. And if you want to debate, maybe you might want to ask, how come when I take it metaphorically and you take it literally, we end up with the same conclusions about how we should live? Isn't that strange? You'd think it'd be very different. I say, well, it's a metaphor, so I don't have to really take it very seriously. It's just a metaphor. Won't work. You live by metaphor. If you don't live by this one, you're living by some other one.
I understand that, and I can respect that position. You say like you don't know, and really no one knows. Kind of whether or not someone interprets something metaphorically or literally. I'm curious, what do you think would
Well, no,
falsify
can I stop you there for a second?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I'm sure, honestly, there were people in the first century that took it literally. I'm sure. I mean, if somebody was reading you this and you were illiterate, say, you'd have tremendous respect for the written word that you couldn't read. I'm sure there was a huge number of people who responded to the written word which they heard orally in the same way as many people today respond to social media or television. I saw it there, it must be true. I'm sure. But that doesn't tell me whether I live by what I would call religiously divine consistency. That I could take it for granted that God doesn't pull tricks, unique tricks, that I can find consistency. I put that in another way. Evolution is consistent. You can figure it out and see what's happening. It's another way of putting it. So what bothers me, and this is what I'm afraid of, is that this discussion about which, now on the which side you come down on, is not accidentally a red herring so that we don't talk about the implications, because it's only implications to get you into trouble. Jesus was not crucified for his opinions. He was crucified for activism. The Romans did not crucify philosophers. They really didn't. They might boot them out of town every now and then, but they didn't crucify them. They didn't think they were important enough. Activists, however, were something else. I don't mean violent people. I mean what we would call activists, people who were stirring up the people, in the Roman phrase, stirring up the people. So I think we might have worked out a marvelous way after 2,000 years of avoiding implications by being very elegant, erudite scholars, not asking stupid questions. It's a perfectly honest, fair question. Do you think this should be taken literally or metaphorically? But in a pre-Enlightenment world, far more was taken literally than you or I would take literally. So I mean, I really want to insist on this. Let me say it once more. Augustus is up in heaven. Jesus is up in heaven. Take both literally. There's a clash. Take both metaphorically. There's a clash. So I can see the argument that you say resurrection is unique. That you're quite true. That's a Pharisaic option. But that's not the way it's been interpreted. It's been interpreted as ascension. I don't see Jesus coming out of the tomb is the way any Pharisee would have understood resurrection. They wouldn't. So even if we're talking literally now, that we talk literally just for the argument, if this is what we're talking about, it ain't resurrection. So I'm willing to say the Western tradition, with all its emphasis on Jesus coming out alone, can be called resurrection, but nobody in the first century would have understood it. I'm not talking about belief. They wouldn't even have understood what you're talking about. If you showed them that picture and said to any of them, what's that? Any of them, including the Pharisees, would have said that's an ascension. It's about Jesus being a unique person, so holy that he was taken up to God, like Moses.